Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. Although we haven't got many items on the agenda, we've obviously got an item that's going to take up a lot of our time. So people could be really disciplined and adhere to the plan we've got in front of us. The only other announcement I have is that I'd like to tell everyone that this meeting will be recorded and broadcast live on the internet and will be available for repeat viewings on the Council's website. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during a webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. Members of the public are only able to speak if they have registered their interest in accordance with the Council's procedure Rule 36A. Public speaking at Planning Applications Committee. As Chair, I have the discretion to adjourn the meeting in the event that there is any disorder from councillors or indeed members of the public in accordance with the Standing Orders 34 and 35. I can also terminate or suspend the webcasting of the meeting in accordance with the webcasting protocol. I hope none of that will be necessary. Good evening then, ladies and gentlemen. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting, which were held on, in fact, we've got two sets of minutes, those on the 2nd of February and the special one on the 15th of February. Are we agreed they're a true record for those of us that were here? Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Carnell.
Thank you, Chairman. Personal interest in item number 9, the golf course. My nephew is a member of the golf club.
Okay, so are you declining to take part in that debate, or is it just a?
It's just noted? A personal interest, in the interest of openness.
Yeah.
Depending on how my vote would go.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else? No. We will get on to questions then, and there are none. And then we come to item 4, which is on page 15, which is the potential site visits. Richard, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. The only one on your list there is the Restoration Pub application 21142. That's 928 Oxford Road. If the committee felt that they would wish to conduct a site visit, officers would strongly recommend that would be unaccompanied, as the site is perfectly capable of viewable from public vantage points. So that would be our advice, Chair. Okay, thank you. I think probably we could be sent a note about this site, and if people want to go and have a look, they could do. Yeah, is everybody happy with that? Any other site visits? I'll just flag up that we've still got Raniket to come, and we're not quite sure which committee that's going to come to, but nevertheless, we did say we would have a site visit there ahead of the committee considering that application. So if we could remember to do that, please. Thank you. If there's nothing else on site visits, planning appeals on page 19. Thank you, Chair. There's no reports from officers here. We've got 2 appeals lodged. One decided it was a loss. It was allowed. It was to do with 13 signs. We contested one of them. They appealed it, and the appeal was allowed. Nothing further. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions, comments on any of these? No? Note that then. Thank you very much. Takes us on to the Huntley and Palmer's Social Club Gasworks. Sorry, applications of prior approval. I don't know why I always. Page 23, Richard. Thank you.
Nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments? No, we note that then, please. And then we do get on to item 7, Huntley and Palmer's Social Club Gasworks Road on page 29. And I believe Bruce is going to just say a couple of words about this.
Sorry, is Bruce not on the call?
Is he not able to join us?
Okay, if you want me to do it quickly, Chair.
Yes, please.
There is a short update report. This is the Huntley and Palmer's Social Club. Proposal is to add it to the local list. The reports are there for you, and the images are on the screen.
Oh,
And our conservation officer is just arriving.
right. Bruce, have you got anything to add to what's just been said by Richard?
Yes, could you repeat the question? I assume he said everything.
Is there anything in the update, Bruce? There's the thing about the social importance. Do you just want to say a couple of words on that?
There's just a few minor typos and one or two words changed. It's essentially the same as the initial report.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Rowland, you just want to say a few words as the ward councillor particularly.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I would like to welcome very much and commend this to colleagues here on the committee this evening. The Huntley and Palmer Social Club coming forward at this time celebrates 200 years, actually, of Huntley and Palmer's in this town. This obviously being a much later building, but it's certainly exuberant. It certainly does speak to the social history as well as the industrial history of this town and one of our biggest points of pride. So I just, in terms of getting on this evening, would really very much like to welcome it. And yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Are
Chair.
we agreed with this recommendation? Oh, Bruce.
I'd just like to add it's going to be a nice addition to the first one that we did 2 months ago with the park next to it.
Yeah, it'd be very nice. Yeah. Okay, are we all agreed with that? Agreed. Thank you. Us on to the applications to be decided. Because we have public speaking on the golf club, we will take that before we take turn close. So now I've got a list of people who are wishing to speak on this. I'll just explain for everybody's benefit what's going to happen. We have an introduction in a minute from the case officer, and then there are objectors, of which there are 4, Helen Lambert, Steve Harcourt, Claire Grassoff and Jennifer Leach, who wish to speak. And normally we only have public speaking for 5 minutes, but we've doubled that to 10. So you each get a share of that, and I hope you've worked that out between yourselves. We then have somebody speaking in support of the application, and that's Richard Stainthorpe, who also gets up to 10 minutes to speak. And then we get the agent, Jonathan Walton, supported by Gary Stango by phone, but also Andrew Smith and Martin Wilkes in the chamber to make a presentation about their proposal and answer any questions. We then have 2 non-members of committee councillors who wish to speak. Councillor Clarence Mitchell is one of the ward councillors, and Councillor Adele Barnett Ward, who's councillor for neighbouring Caversham Ward. So they will get to speak after that, but we don't get an opportunity to question them as such. We will then get on to members of the committee who can make comment, ask questions and so on. So I hope that's clear. Okay, thank you. So to start, we have the case officer, Matt Burns, who's going to introduce his report. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. There is an update report to this item on pages 7 to 18 of the update pack. The update includes some amended wording for the proposed Section 106 obligations relating to carbon offsetting, and also proposes that the contribution towards highway improvements to Peppard Road, Prospect Street, Henley Road and Westfield Road Junction is increased from £50,000 to £100,000. The update report also proposes 2 additional conditions relating to Thames water requirements and to allow for a potential phased implementation of the development. It should also be noted that following notification received yesterday, the officer recommendation is to approve is now subject to confirmation from the Secretary of State that they do not wish to call in the application for their own determination. The application itself relates to part of the former Reading Golf Club site and seeks outline planning permission for demolition of the existing clubhouse and the erection of a new residential scheme of 223 dwellings, including affordable housing and public open space. The application seeks approval for matters of access, landscaping, layout and scale, with appearance matters being reserved. Members will recall an outline application was refused last year for a development of 257 dwellings on the site. The reasons for refusal of this application related to loss of undesignated open space, unacceptable layout, scale and landscaping, loss of biodiversity and trees, failure to mitigate the impact of the development on the road network, insufficient sustainability measures, and given the application was refused, a further reason for refusal related to a lack of a Section 106 agreement to secure the various associated 106 obligations. The main agenda report and update report set out a detailed officer assessment of the proposals and include discussion as to how the proposals are considered to have overcome the previous reasons for refusal. Officers can confirm that a further 16 letters of objection to the application have been received following publication of the main agenda report, which includes a further response from Keep Emma Green Group. Issues raised within those objections are considered to have been covered within the objection summary attached as the appendix to the main agenda report, as well as within the overall assessment of the application that is contained within the main agenda report and the update report. One additional letter of support has been received from the Reading Civic Society. So the key differences between the current proposal and the application that was refused last year include a reduction in the overall number of dwellings from 257 down to 223, and that includes a reduction in proportion of flats and an increase in the proportion of 3, 4 and 5 bed dwellings. The current proposal also omits the on-site health centre that was proposed previously and instead proposes to provide a financial contribution to support improvements to existing healthcare provision at Emma Green Surgery. There is also an increase in the quantum of publicly accessible open space on the site from 4.07 hectares to 4.63 hectares. And this includes an enlarged and continuous area of public open space along the northeast boundary of the site. Biodiversity and tree planting measures are also proposed and will provide a net gain in biodiversity on site and include a net gain of 84 trees on site. The proposals also include additional highway improvement obligations, whilst there are various changes to the site layout, including increased landscape buffer to the northern boundary with South Oxfordshire. It should be noted that 3.75 hectares of the 12.15 hectare application site is land allocated within the local plan under policy CA1B for residential development, which includes provision of a replacement clubhouse and is also subject to there being future provision of golf on the remainder of the site. As set out within paragraph 6.14 to 6.16 of the main agenda report, and paragraph 6.1 to 6.5 of the update report, the application site is much larger than that covered by the site allocation. Reading Golf Club have now also left the site and relocated to the Caversham Golf Club, such that the continuation of golf on the remainder of the site is no longer considered realistic, nor is the provision of a replacement clubhouse. Therefore, it's clear that the development envisaged by policy CA1B has no realistic prospect of being delivered, and as such, the application should be determined on its own merits based upon the other policies in the local plan and other material considerations. The officer recommendation is to grant outline planning permission subject to the recommended section 106 obligations, conditions and confirmation from the Secretary of State that they do not wish to call in the application for their determination, which is as per set out recommendation box in the main agenda and the update report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now get on to public speakers. As I say, I have 4 objectors: Helen Lambert, Steve Harcourt, Claire Grassoff and Jennifer Leach. And if you want to come forward, and then you can introduce yourselves perhaps in the order that you intend to speak, but then we won't need to disrupt your flow in order to introduce you in between each other, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Is that on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm Claire Grassoff, former councillor for Peppard Ward, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Keep Emma Green Action Group.
I'm Steve Harcourt, the acting chair of EGRA.
I'm Helen Lambert, chair of Caversham and District Residents Association, EGRA.
Thank you. I haven't seen any red lights.
Okay.
Shall I say again? I'm Helen Lambert. I'm the chair of the Caversham and District Residents Association, known as CADRA.
I'm Jennifer Leach. I'm here as a local, as a mother, and as director of Earth Arts organisation Outright Anthems.
Thank you. So when you're ready, are you going in the order that you spoke? Yes. So it's Claire Grassoff first then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is not okay. This is not the Reading that our community wants. This is not the Reading that you councillors wanted when you signed off the local plan. This is not the Reading that you councillors signed up for when you declared a climate emergency 3 years ago to the day almost. It's not okay to turn Reading upside down and destroy 12 hectares of beautiful parkland and mature trees in exchange for only 15 truly affordable family rental properties, all the other affordable homes being either shared ownership or 1 or 2 bedroom homes, of which Reading already has plenty. It's not okay that Fairfax and the golf club have had unfettered access to Mr Burns, the planning officer, while the community has been completely ignored. This is particularly concerning as the former have been so lax with the truth on so many occasions throughout this process. It's not okay that the new and exclusive The Caversham is now so oversubscribed that junior members can't even join, so much for encouraging and nurturing the talent of the future. This new club is not a replacement for the local community facility that we lost. It's a world-class vanity project that has been relentlessly and ruthlessly pursued by the golf club management since they bribed members with the possibility of a 6-figure sum of money in order to secure their vote to sell the land back in 2018. It's not okay that none of the changes in this application satisfactorily address the concerns that you raised in July last year. Indeed, some of the aspects of the plan are actually worse. There's more than enough wrong with it to reject it. You know it, I think, and we know it because you've already rejected it once. It's not okay that Mr Burns seems to think that your carefully thought out local plan and your planning policies are an irrelevance. It's not okay to refuse sites in Abbey Ward because they don't comply with the local plan and then just conveniently tear up the rule book when it comes to development in Peppard Ward. Congestion and pollution on our narrow roads are the daily norm for 30,000 North Reading residents, and development in Reading has been strategically planned via the local plan with this massive issue in mind. Councillor Page, you have said on numerous occasions that Reading has demonstrated via your local plan that you are a responsible planning authority, but that doesn't seem to hold much truck with Mr Burns. It's not the council's job to sort out the mess that the golf club have got themselves into by packing up and moving off without securing planning approval. Just because the land is vacant does not mean the presumption here is in favour of development. On the contrary, it's in favour of protecting the green space that's been left behind. It's the council's job to protect its residents, to protect its town, to protect its environment and its open spaces, and to protect democracy. Please, you have an obligation to us and to the town you care so passionately about. We have to trust you to do the right thing. Please reject this application.
Back in January, the overwhelming opinion we received from the Emma Green Resident Association membership was unchanged from the previous two applications, mainly due to the observed similarity of this latest application with only minimal material changes. However, the stronger reaction came last Wednesday when the planning officer recommended approval and listed the numerous topics that were now regarded as compliant. EGRA members agree wholeheartedly with all of the points of objection we're raising here today and would like to register our shock and surprise at the recommendation to approve. Our residents feel there has been very little time for any of us, possibly including the committee here today, to understand how these minimal material changes can have resulted in a full reversal of opinion to now recommend approval. We would like to politely suggest that if the committee feel they have also not had enough time to understand these differences, and because they are unable to reject the application today, perhaps, then the committee should defer a decision to a later date so that all parties are given more time to review and consider the details. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, councillors. I hope you can refer to the CADRA summary circulated at the weekend. Firstly, the all-important local plan is to be set aside because the golf club could no longer make its deal stack up. The club was aware of the risks and in fact widely criticised the plan. The concerns of landscape, infrastructure and traffic have not changed. Loss of open space was a key reason for the previous refusal, despite an increase of 4.4 hectares off-site. But now we read that 0.56 hectares of extra open space within the site can offset this loss. The quality of the open space proposed, the small areas and thin strips of land of limited use to residents, and the play area is across the main road from most houses, secluded by trees and between two ponds, raising concerns for safety, security, antisocial behaviour. Would you let your children play there unsupervised? 7.2 refers to the significant benefit of public access to the open space, but this is doubtful in reality. 6.2.29 concludes it would, on balance, outweigh the proposed overall loss of open space. It's hardly a ringing endorsement. The green links in the biodiversity. There are still concerns about risk to trees. The biodiversity gain is highly marginal and not reflecting the detailed local knowledge. The green links are limited and likely to be compromised. On traffic, it is undisputed that the Kiln Road junctions already exceed capacity. But the widening of the Caversham Park Road approach is pointless as there is very little right-turning traffic. It's undisputed that the Westfield Road junction already operates above the maximum operating capacity. Officers have long advised that pedestrian sequences would increase queues, but yet 50,000 and now we see it's 100. The figure I've heard suggested is 200. That's meant to provide a solution to them and to the worsening queues. No account is taken of the peak period blocking back from Prospect Street, and the proposed MOVA would have zero effect during the peak periods and will not accommodate additional development traffic. Congestion spreads across Caversham, and as recognised in the draft local transport plan, bus journey times are unreliable as a result of the congestion, making public transport an unattractive option. If this continuing downward spiral is to be halted, the suggested 106 payment to local bus services should apply more widely. The proposed herringbone surface for pedestrian crossings has been shown to erode after a few years. A more robust and long-lasting solution is needed to avoid pressures on council funding at a later date. The 106 are somehow to be agreed in a month, and some conditions are not to be resolved until commencement or even occupation, despite the uncertainties of drainage and water supply, which will add complications to the already complex arrangements around important trees. And on the housing numbers, we see that there is a reduction in 3 and 4 bedroom properties from the previous plan. I hope you will reject this application.
Before I begin, I'd just like to say that I'm really sorry, in particular to any young people in the room who have to listen to what I've got to say. I appreciate that local planning has an eye on the microscope. Without the other eye on the telescope, however, we make faulty decisions and flawed choices. At this moment in history, we have no option but to look through the telescope. As I'm sure all of you are aware, the IPCC report will be released on Monday, and it will confirm that we are on the verge of snuffing out this extraordinary miracle that is life on Earth. What words to have to say. I would add here that no amount of juggling with carbon offsetting or fiddling for figures is going to save the planet, save us. 2 days ago, the Red Cross, seeing what it sees across the world and using the language of wartime emergency, has called for the climate crisis to be named as an issue of national security, Here in this room, this very room, you courageously declared in 2019 a climate emergency in Reading. You all knew then, and we knew then, that it had to be meaningful, that you were going to have to make courageous decisions in the face of great pressure from those who have 2 eyes firmly fixed on the microscope. Lobbyists, people with power and influence, people with vested interests.
You've had 10 minutes.
I would really, really appreciate the opportunity of finishing. I have not got much longer to say.
We will be having questions in a minute. I'm sure you'll be able to pick up some of your points to the if members have questions.
I'm sorry, can I just say there's a planet at stake here, and I would really appreciate 1 more minute to finish what I have to say.
Please.
Could I ask, please?
I think if you could sit down, please, and we will get to questions, and I'm sure there'll be a question on which you can add the
Could
points.
I ask somebody to ask me a question about finishing my speech? Thank you.
Have we got any questions to the 4 speakers from members of the committee? Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, what's the last minute then?
Thank you so much. This development proposal does not sit right in the context of crisis, and rightful opposition does not diminish, it swells. For who would choose to bulldoze a green lung at this point in human history and replace it with mortar and bricks? The applicants seek to grind us down until they get what they came for. No amount of slick imagery and green marketing will alter the fact that a whip straight out of the nursery is not the same as a veteran tree. And science has proved that the interruption of one localized habitat cascades through the land like a chain of toppling dominoes. This scheme can in no way be marketed as a nature-rich, eco-friendly development with open access recreational spaces delivered with beneficence and care for the local community. We have got to turn the ship. The change has to begin now, and it has to begin at home. And we ask that it begin here with your turning down of this insensitive and ecologically destructive proposal. And I thank you very much for letting me finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis, are you indicating again?
Yeah, I got one more, that's all right. Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
But the question is, I want to ask is, what's your message to the scores or potentially hundreds of young people in Caversham who haven't got mortgages, haven't got houses, who may look upon this application and to think that for the first time I potentially could live in the area that I want to, and that I was born and brought up in, and that I would like to live in more affordable housing in the Caversham area? What would be your message to them?
You addressing it to me? Oh, okay. No, yeah, okay. I'd just like to say that the situation is we're in such a broken paradigm that we have to start somewhere. And I think it's the long term is what we need to look at. I completely agree with what you're saying, and I would say that there's such a small percentage of housing in this proposal that would be at all suitable for for young people. And I would say that there are ways of addressing the housing market that start with making vacant properties, over 200,000 vacant properties in London for a start, making those available they are residential housing, to look at the question of second homes, which skew the house market, to stop seeing property as a form of investment and as a form of shelter. And I think that the absolutely critical thing that nobody can really argue with is that in 8 years' time, there is not going to be a future for children. There's not going to be housing. There's not going to be stability. And unless we really embrace that fact, I think we're completely barking up the wrong tree. And if this proposal had the goodness of the community at its heart, we could have a different conversation, but it hasn't.
Does anybody else want to respond to that? We're happy to move on to the next question.
No.
Councillor Emberson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a slightly different question. I know we had this on the last application in terms of the land being open space, and tonight Claire Grasshoff referred to it as parkland. And I just kind of wanted to extend the opportunity, and I think last time you mentioned Councillor Page walked his dogs there, etc. But to me, it was quite clear at the site visit that it is indeed private land and there are no rights of way. So I just wanted to, I suppose, give opportunity for you to comment in terms of that.
It is private land, you're absolutely right, but local residents have been allowed to walk their dogs, and I mean, a lot of the houses that back onto the golf course have got access onto the golf course. They've had access onto the golf course since the houses were built, so they have been able to go out there and they have been able to walk around and use the site. You know, it was very kind of the golf course club to let them do that, but they have been able to do that, and they've been able to do that for the last, how many, I don't know, 70, 80 years.
Anybody else got a question for the objectors? Not seeing anybody, so thank you very much for your time. I know it was difficult to try and divide it up between you, but we got there in the end, hopefully. Can we now have Mr. Richard Stainthorpe, who's going to speak in favour of this application?
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock. May I first of all congratulate Matt Burns and his colleagues on producing such a comprehensive report on this multifaceted and significant planning application, which I would like to speak in support of. When I asked to speak in favour of this application, it was solely in a personal capacity, but I'm pleased to say that at a meeting of the Management Committee of Reading Civic Society last Friday, the plans for Reading Golf Course were discussed, and it was the view of those present that they agreed that the recommendation for approval should be supported. I therefore have the agreement of the Chair of Reading Civic Society to say that RCS agree with the recommendations and conclusions in this report, and that I'm speaking in favour as a representative of them as well as personally. To quote, Reading Civic Society seeks to engage positively with ideas which will influence the look and impact of our town. Some we like and some we loathe. We seek to positively influence both by early engagement when given the opportunity. In my view, the most pertinent section excuse me, of the Planning Officer's appraisal is the following on page 75, paragraph 6.1.6. The submitted planning statement that accompanies this planning application sets out how the position of Reading Golf Club has altered since the local plan enquiry. The applicant considers that the development envisaged by the Reading local plan, with a limited residential development to secure the golf course on the remainder of the site, cannot now realistically be delivered. Therefore, planning officers consider that this submission should be considered on its own merits and determined based on the other relevant policies in the local plan and other material considerations. So when one looks at how the application measures up to the relevant policies in the local plan, other than the one relating specifically to this site, objectively, one must conclude that subject to the usual provisions, it should be approved. As my time is limited, I will just reference a few points that I think are particularly important. With regard to tree cover, the report states there are 320 trees or groups of trees on or near the site, and that of these existing trees, 11 are high quality, category A, and comprise English oak and Scots pine. 119 are moderate quality, category B, 174 are low quality, category C, and 16 are unsuitable for retention quality, category U. The proposed development would require removal of 112 trees to allow the construction of the dwellings, parking spaces, and associated infrastructure. Of the trees to be removed, 15 are considered to be of moderate quality, 73 are low quality, and 9 are considered unsuitable for retention. So in terms of tree cover, the application will result in the removal of no high quality trees and the removal of 82 low quality C or U trees. These will be replaced by 194 semi-mature trees of far higher quality, a net gain of 84 trees in total tree cover on the site, a total of over 400 quality trees. I'm tempted to say that that would be the equivalent of a small arboretum. I also see that because golf courses are actually quite sterile environments, it is anticipated that the development will increase the overall biodiversity within its boundaries. I note the wishes of the clinical commissioning group that a new standalone medical facility is not desired, and that they have a strong preference for expansion of the existing nearby Emma Green surgery. In line with this, the developers will now be contributing over £500,000 to enable this. A significant change from the previous application, and one that will benefit a large proportion of residents living north of the river. Another particular interest of mine is education. I'm a governor of 2 local primary schools and until recently was a member of the executive committee of the Reading Governors Association. There is relatively little reference to the impact on local schools, but there is a widespread misapprehension that local schools are bursting at the seams. But it is worth noting that this is not the case. Trends in future pupil numbers are notoriously difficult to predict, but it is a fact that in recent years, most primary schools in the area have been struggling with insufficient numbers of children entering reception, and the anticipated 100 or so extra primary and secondary children arising from this development will help alleviate this. Another benefit of the application going ahead. As the report notes, there are transport challenges, but the developers have offered a very significant package of improvements. Section 106 payments to bus services and a car club, in addition to the community infrastructure levies money of around £2.5 million that can be used for further offset or towards further implementation of the Reading transport strategy. Relevantly, I also think that traffic is changing due to work patterns, and that the significant financial benefits offered by this development will go a long way to improving the traffic problems that exist both in the immediate area and further afield. This application offers a reduction in the number of apartments and an increase in the number of houses. Surely a change to be welcomed by the many local people who bemoan the number of flats being given planning permission and campaign for an increase in the number of family houses being built in Reading. I suspect, however, that many of the people that...
Can we please listen to each other without interruption?
I suspect, however, that many of the people who say this are those who object to the application. A case of more houses, please. Oh, but not in my backyard. The application offers the 30% affordable housing required by the local plan, and to quote from it, Policy H3 also sets out that priority needs for affordable housing is for 2 or 3 bedroom units that can house families. In the respect, 85.1% of the proposed affordable housing units would be 2 bedroom or larger, which is again considered to be a benefit of the proposals in providing much needed affordable family sized homes. An increase in public open space of 4.63 hectares, Granted, there is a loss of 6.8 hectares of undesignated open space, but this is land to which the general public currently has no access, unless you happen to own a house which backs onto the golf course. To quote from the report, when the site was in use as an active golf club, public enjoyment of the site was restricted to golf club members and a small number of residents who overlook the land. The proposed provision of public access to 4.63 of open space, hectares of open space for future occupiers of the proposed development and also to existing residents and the wider public is considered to represent a significant improvement and public benefit. I could go on to cover other issues raised by the objectors and identified in this report, but suffice to say that the developers' proposals conform to the local plan policies. And I can see Councillor Page looking at his watch, so I better draw to a close. I live on Caversham Park Village, a development built on what was formerly the private grounds of the Caversham Park Mansion, a development that provided houses and flats for Reading's growing population, along with a significant amount of public open space that people can legally benefit from and enjoy. I used to live near to Bugs Bottom and admit in the 1990s I erroneously campaigned against it. I now see a maturing development that provides houses and flats for Reading's growing population, along with a significant increase in the amount of public open space that people can legally benefit from and enjoy. And surely the redundant Reading Golf Club site will be another application that will in future be viewed in a similar vein. A development that provided houses and flats for Reading's growing population, along with a significant increase in the amount of public open space that local people can legally benefit from and enjoy. I think that this application should therefore be granted permission to proceed and indeed applauded as one that in the future will benefit our increasingly vibrant, successful and diverse town, or possibly city, and its growing population. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Planning Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Stainthorpe. Can you stay where you are for a minute? I'll see if there are any questions. Anybody got questions for Mr. Stainthorpe? I'm not seeing anyone indicate, so thank you very much for your time. And we will now go on to hearing from the applicant. No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, you can't just jump up and ask questions. It will descend into confusion if we do that. Right, so we now have Jonathan Walton, who is going to speak on behalf of the developers, Andrew Smith and Martin Wilkes to support him if need be, and I think Gary Stango is phoning in from home, so could make sure we've got him online as well. Thank you very much. If you'd like to introduce yourself and what your role is in the development, thank you.
Yes, I'm Jonathan Walton. I'm planning consultant for the golf club, also a member of Reading Golf Club, former resident of Emma Green, the child that used to go to the Health School and used to go to the surgery there, so I do know the area quite well. I'll be providing the presentation. Gentlemen from Fairfax and Gary will be here for questions. Given that so much has been dealt with by Mr. Stainthorpe and Mr. Burns, I'm not going to go into some of the details. I'm just going to present some of the facts. I'd like to use my time for questions. I'd like you to ask me any question that you would like to ask, and I will answer it truthfully and honestly. Ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Committee, the facts of this application have been rehearsed for more than 4 years, both during the local plan process and through previous planning applications. At all times, we work closely with planning officers to ensure that a development in Reading's best interests can come forward. In the first instance, it's important to note that, save for the policy CA1B allocation and the policy EN12 Green Corridor, the site is non-designated white land within the borough boundary for which a presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. Changes to housing need methodology have seen the quantum of housing needed to be provided within the borough increase from 689 dwellings per hectare in the local plan to now 876 dwellings per hectare. In addition, the Council's annual monitoring report identifies significant underdelivery of affordable housing and family housing, this being irrespective of any slowdown created by COVID. Reading recognises its acute housing problem and the particular issues with affordable and family homes. Compounding this, it's noted that larger flatted sites in the town centre are not delivering the affordable housing, family housing envisaged. It's highly likely that other brownfield sites identified in the local plan will have similar redevelopment costs and/or adjacency issues, meaning the pattern of houses and gardens will make way for flats and hardscaping, and that will continue. The Council has a number of key objectives in this local plan, its infrastructure delivery plan and supplementary planning guidance. Most notably, these relate to housing, affordable housing, family housing, climate change, increasing tree cover, increasing biodiversity, providing greater access to open spaces, sport and leisure, encouraging walking and cycling, and improving transport, education and healthcare, particularly to the north of the river. The applicant has sought to provide a scheme that enables a multifaceted benefit and legacy for Evergreen's future. In this manner, the application will deliver 223 new homes, including 217 houses or bungalows. Of this, 142 are 3 or more bedroom houses, and there's a further 62 2-bed houses or bungalows. 67 affordable homes are provided at a policy compliant tenure split. Of this, 33 homes will be 3 or 4 bed, with a further 18 provided as 2-bed houses or bungalows, providing a net zero carbon solution for 83% on-site carbon reduction and a carbon offset levy to bring down the rest for 100%. There's a net uplift of 84 trees on the application site. These will be provided as semi-mature and of native species. As been mentioned before, the trees that are coming out are not veteran trees. There will be a 10% net biodiversity gain. This is delivered on site through new planting, along with a financial contribution for further planting elsewhere in the borough. It's also important to note that the open spaces elsewhere on the Reading Golf Club site will be opened, and that the golf club site is also operating as Fairways a golf centre. So there's more biodiversity than you see simply through this application. Provide more than 4 hectares of usable public open space and play spaces, which will be accessible to the public for the very first time. There's a range of local transport improvements to mitigate the highway's impact and to enable more walking and cycling in the vicinity, and significant planning contributions towards improvements to existing open spaces, 3G sports pitches, transport improvements, bus services and healthcare north of the river. In planning terms, this is what Evergreen needs rather than maybe what it wants. Schools are under-occupied by local children, with council reports evidencing more new starters coming out of catchment. With out of catchment, movements become car trips that are unnecessary. Local healthcare requires investment. There is a current public open space deficiency. Sports facilities are insufficient, tired and in need of rejuvenation. Just ask Caversham AFC. Our planning application delivers each of these benefits, and in time the facilities and spaces created will be used and well loved by the local population, particularly our future generations. The Golf Club has always cared about legacy in sport, as investment in sport and leisure on site and in the locality, the successful family golf centre in South Oxfordshire and the vast improvements that the Caversham clearly highlight. I recognise this is an emotive application for some, but the role of planning is to consider what's in the best interests of the borough. Take into consideration local plan policy and other material considerations. More importantly, good and effective planning is about giving back and providing balance where it is needed. In this regard, I'd urge members to follow the officer's recommendation and support this well-considered application. I want to add one final point before I move to questions, and that is that Matt Burns is not the council. Matt Burns is a planning officer doing his job. Matt Burns has to report to planning officers, and the planning officers as a group make their determination on what is right and proper. Therefore, the haranguing and the public putting down, I think is the best word, of Matt Burns is absolutely abhorrent, and you should be ashamed of yourselves. Thank you very much.
Chair, it's Gary Stengel here. Is it possible just to correct some of the things that have been said earlier about the access to the golf club?
Well, let's move on to questions now, and then I'm sure there'll be questions that people will want to ask.
Chair, they only had 5 minutes if they do.
Sorry?
They only had 5 minutes if you do want to give any time.
Oh, sorry, have you still got time? And yes, I assumed you'd ended because it was 10 minutes was up.
No, it was only 5.
No, in that case, do you want to say something about?
Just there's been some misinformation said to do with the access to the golf club. The golf club land is private. There's one small 350-yard public right away to the north, which is actually in South Oxfordshire. So the land is completely private. The residents who have gates have been allowed access to tender their hedges on that side of the land. They do not have, and they've never had access to our land. There are 48 signs up over our whole land, at the moment currently saying our land is private. There's no public access to it. There are 477 members who own the land, and as owners they've had access to our land, but there's no public access to it at all. It is private land, just to make that clear. During lockdown, we opened up our land, which we thought was a very nice thing to do and I received hundreds of emails thanking us, most of which said we don't even know this land existed. We didn't realise what it was like. Very grateful for that opportunity. Unfortunately, KEG tried to use our generosity to submit an application, an ACV application on us, which meant that we had to restrict public access in the following 2 lockdowns. So just to make that perfectly clear, the land, we did it to help with lockdown, and it was very well received, but unfortunately we couldn't offer it again. But the land is private. And just to talk about what Jennifer Leach was saying in terms of the plan, in 2018 when KEG was formed, and I just need to read out some words here. The group was originally a small number of golf club members plus some local residents who would be directly affected by the golf club's plans. That's from a KEG member who did an interview. That group submitted a plan to the golf club in 2018, and again, important to note that all these decisions were being made in 2018 about the golf club's future. They're not being made in the last year or two, they were made in 2018. That group submitted a plan to try and stay in Evergreen by building 130 houses on the CA1B, and to do so, they were going to chop down huge areas of ancient woodland. They were going to put up hugely high fences around the local community, around the local houses. And in doing so, by keeping the golf club in the land and building 130 houses, would have added far more transport, far more traffic to the local area. So, but significantly, there was no care of chopping down ancient woodland. All their tactics changed after that plan was rejected. And I think it's important that everybody actually understands that. And again, all of this information, I would lose my job if it wasn't factually correct. And it's important that that information is out there. Thank you.
No, please, could you? Oh, sorry, Mr. Stango, have you finished, or have you got a bit more to say? Thank you. Anybody else from the, no, you're ready for questions now. Okay, thank you. Right, who would like to ask questions of the developers? Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Jonathan, for coming out this evening. I do have a few questions specifically in the areas regarding the biodiversity on the site. And I hope that you've got some experts with you, I suppose, that might be able to address some of those issues. Okay, because maybe one of them would be more appropriate. There was a lot of discussion about the green link that we have within our local plan, and it's stipulated of a north-south green link through the site and an east-west link that actually goes up to that north-south link. And when I look at this, and I put my north-south link on there, and I put my east-west link on there, I see a couple of areas where I felt like it could really have been improved. Especially, and I'm sorry, it's really difficult to show it any other way, especially in this area right here where you've got that north-south link, and you've got 3 houses along there. And then also, in speaking of that east-west link and that challenge where the development that's the entryway onto Kidmore End Road. And I wanted to know if you could speak to that, and also to say how you feel that north-south link is going, where I am certainly observing some pinch points, and what your thoughts are on that at this point. and if there's any even mitigation or something. Thank you.
I think yes, in terms of the green link, obviously what we've tried to do is we've tried to provide an avenue from the east, from the entrance through to the centre of the site where it links up with the open space, the area of open space. We've then got the land from there, which goes directly up the eastern side of the site to what is the local wildlife site, which is right at the top of the site. So we've tried to link those key points. Yes, once we get beyond the public open space and where we have the three houses, originally we had a link through there, and we tried to provide a rear access into Emma Green primary school, and that's how that originally had been built up. That wasn't just, unfortunately, we didn't have any engagement the other way, and because there was no link in there, we didn't want to leave an area that was just sitting there. Essentially, if you remember in the last application, we had a wooded area at the back there, but there were concerns about antisocial behaviour and so on. So what we've done is we've created sort of a boundary to make sure we're looking in onto the open spaces. But what you do have is a quite continuous green link from the west, sorry, from the east through to the centre and then up to the north. It's important because in policy EN12, you'll see that when you come out of the site to the east and you go into the existing area, it just links into people's back gardens. There's no continuous green link. So it's a hypothetical green link in that essence, but I feel that we've provided certainly a link that is continuous and allows it takes you through from one end of the site through to another end of the site.
I do find that a bit worrisome when you're sitting down there saying it's a hypothetical link, Jonathan, and fair play. I mean, I know, and I've read through the documentation here and looked really into this green link, and I understand that we can't really we can have a green link that actually does go through private properties. But I think you know the reality as well as I do. Once you own a private property, you can do whatever you want with it. And I know also that you've got hedgehog highways through the sites. But what when you own a private property? I mean, you could just decide you don't like hedgehogs. And no, seriously, I mean, it's really not even funny. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, and then that's it. So how do you all, as developers, sit down there and guarantee that to me those three houses right there are not going to be an issue? And indeed, how does one sit down there and say thou shalt keep your hedgehog highways when you've got private properties? So thank you.
That's fine. I think I'd clarify. When I say it's hypothetical, it's probably relating it to what is off-site. In terms of the way that it does go through other people's back gardens in exactly the same way. So your green links are outside of the site do exactly that. They go through people's gardens on site. The majority of that link, as you can see, right from the site entrance, right to the centre and right up to the north, is in public open space. It's in spaces that aren't being affected. So the only thing that realistically starts to be affected is where you're going through the three back gardens. Now, the three back gardens themselves are in the same way as you've got off-site. When it comes to the provisions of on-site bat boxes, bird boxes, hedgehog highways, and so on, these are done in a manner that is subject to planning conditions. It's subject to quite detailed work, which will go into the way fences are constructed and so on. So they are there in order to try and ensure that biodiversity, that things can move around. Yes, once you get to private ownership, people can change things. They can change their fences. If you want to protect against that, there's plenty of open plan policies. There's plenty of fencing policies, plenty of permitted development rights that you could actually put in or take away, or conditions you could put in place to protect against that in the same way that you do with tree preservation orders. Ultimately, it comes down to probably the only things that you feel that you couldn't control and enforce against would be three back gardens of those houses. The rest of it is open and public.
Councillor Payne. Councillor Page.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Walton, for your presentation. This questions about the golf club. At its peak, how many members were there at the golf club, and what proportion came by car to the facility?
As we've got Gary on here, who's the manager, I'll defer to Gary to answer that, if that's okay.
Thank you. At its peak, I mean, the peak time of the golf club was certainly before I arrived at the club, 2012, 2013, the first time. But numbers were limited. It was always about sort of 500. I think we estimated that there could be up to about 300 cars coming in and out the car park on any one day, and the busy times, which could be about 600 car journeys along Kidmore End Road at its peak on its busiest day. Obviously weekdays I weren't quite as busy as that, but possibly that on the busiest days.
Can I add to that question, if it's okay? Just because it's something that Matt Burns brought up in his presentation. At the moment, in the local plan, you have an allocation for up to 130 units and a health centre, community infrastructure and health centre, and a working golf course, including a replacement clubhouse. That's all within CA1B. Now, if you look at the maths, a 130 unit development plus a health centre, which you're getting cars going in every day, and a golf course, it essentially are 90 cars going to go in and out of that golf course every day. Absolutely. So in terms of what you already have in the local plan versus what is actually identified here, it's going to be very similar indeed.
Jonathan, I think we also need to add there that there's the bottle banks that the golf club have housed, and there's up to 50 cars a day through the whole course of the day visit the bottle banks.
Can I ask people, can we stop a minute, please? I shall stop the meeting altogether if you don't stop shouting. So please listen. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just saying, yeah, so there's up to another 100 journeys out to the bottle bank along Kidmore End Road a week.
Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Stanford-Beale, then Councillor Ennis, then Councillor Robinson to ask questions. Councillor Stanford-Beale.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Walton, thank you for coming in tonight and talking to us again. I just wanted to ask you about the Section 106. When the report came out last week, I was very surprised at the very long list of different things that the developers had agreed to be funding. I was even more surprised when I found out that the contribution to the Peppard Road, Prospect Street, Henley Road junction was going to be doubled from 50 to 100,000. Can you explain why there are so many contributions there? And also, is this site actually going to be financially viable? If you've got to make such large contributions, will there still be the money left to have the affordable housing in there? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, in terms of the contributions are elements that have been discussed and agreed with your officers. They're seen as what's necessary to meet healthcare requirements, and what's necessary for the carbon offsetting, open spaces, and as you rightly say, the transport contributions. So that is what is relevant, seen as relevant to the scheme. Now, this is a scheme that is delivering a significant number of houses. The council will be receiving somewhere in the region of about £2.6 million in SIL, and then just under another £2 million in contributions. Now, that doesn't have a viability effect on the scheme. I think if the contributions were to increase significantly, then it would, but there's no viability argument in place in terms of this. So yes, they will be delivered, and they will be delivered as expected.
Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Ennis.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find in the papers, because I think the answers about the biodiversity, carbon, zero carbon are very powerful, and we as a council, we cannot guarantee that there'll never be another house built in the area due to climate emergency. That's just not possible. What is the quality of the houses that you're intending on building? What is your contribution to making the area as more zero carbon effect?
Can I answer that in two ways? First of all, we've talked a lot about sustainability tonight. I'll come on to the question in terms of the standards, and I have to say this, and I deal with this up and down the land at this moment in time. We have 28 million houses in this country. A population of just over 60 million. So why do we need any more houses? And they'll all say, why do we need more houses? We need more houses because they're badly distributed. We have a lot of people here today, and I'm sorry, I don't begrudge it. It's just like my parents, living in 1s and 2s and 4, 5 and 6 bedroom houses. If you take that much stock out and you live in those houses for that long, then the people behind you can't fulfill those houses. They can't move into them. So you're naturally creating the very demand you then object to. It is that simple, and it's that horrible, and that's why the system is broken. And none of us actually want to build a single house more if we don't have to do. I'm a planner. Planners don't have to build houses. We do all sorts of stuff. I did the IKEA and the Costco, God knows whatever else. But nevertheless, developers can't build houses if there is no need, because if there's no need, there's no demand, and nobody would buy them. It's that simple. But the reason that we have to do this is because of the need. So what do we do to make it more sustainable? Well, we have to build to better standards. We have to build to Part L building regulations. We have to make sure they're more thermally efficient. We have to make sure that they're more energy efficient. We have to make sure that they are powered and they can be run effectively off the heat of a hairdryer. They're very much more thermally efficient than the stock that we have out there. So that is built into every house in terms of the building regulations that have to be applied, and it's to a house builder's benefit to build things that are more thermally efficient. There are huge improvements that are going forward in that regard. So that is written in, and in terms of what has to be done in terms of the carbon efficiency, we've got planning conditions in place to go back at detailed stage to make sure that we're doing what we said we're going to do. So you have the control there to make sure that we build thermally efficient houses. You have the control there to make sure that you get your 10% net biodiversity gain. The scheme, because of what we're doing also in South Oxfordshire, will provide significantly more net biodiversity gain. The trees that are coming out, nobody wants to lose trees, but the trees that are coming out, we've tried to take out the trees that are the least impactful. We've tried to replace them with semi-mature trees, not with whips. So you'll have a net gain on site. There are 1,000 trees, and people's talking about the 1,000 trees in South Oxfordshire. That still will be done. The 1,000 trees in South Oxfordshire, yes, there'll be whips. Yes, they'll take time to come forward, but they will come forward. Maybe 1,000 won't be the end result, but there'll be several hundred, and they will be there for generations to come.
Councillor Robinson, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. On the map, we can see that the proposed development is just in a small section, really, in the grand scheme of things, of the golf club land. Do you have any intentions of building on the land in South Oxfordshire?
I can honestly say, and I'm never going to say no, because I haven't been instructed one way or another. I will say one thing, though, for you, and my clients wouldn't know this, but I won't be doing the planning on it.
Are there
Jonathan, sorry, can I just
Yes, of course.
Can I just answer that on behalf of the golf club? We've started up the Fairways Family Golf Centre, which is proven successful, and the more successful it is, the more viable it will become, and hopefully it's going to be there for another 100 years. We've also committed, although it's not necessary for this application, to creating the country park area, provide land for allotments as part of the club's commitment, and that's something we've always been committed to, and we look to deliver on it. So, that will happen. That's me.
Thank you. Any more questions from councillors to the developers? No, in which case, can I thank you very much? Comments and questions from members of the committee, but we seem to be having a conflab in the corner here. So.
Chair, you've got councillors to speak.
Oh, I do apologise. Sorry, Councillor Mitchell, you're next.
just wait for a phone to close down behind
Sorry. Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues, for the opportunity to speak to you as committee tonight on such an important item. It's one that affects not just the future of Emma Green within my ward, Peppard Ward, but as you've clearly heard and will be hearing, also that of Caversham Ward, Thames Ward, and indeed there are implications for Reading more widely. As the ward councillor for Peppard, I'm here to represent those residents north of the river who will be directly affected by the application should you vote to approve. It's their voice, their concern over their community's future that I'm conveying this evening. A total, in effect, of some 10,000 voices that I'm urging you, please, to listen to tonight. You're only too aware of the strength of opposition and emotion that this application has created, and the multiple grounds that those against it have cited so loudly, so I will not be using up my allotted time by repeating the granular details. What I will say, though, on behalf of all those residents, is that this is the wrong plan in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's the sheer scale of the development and the long-term environmental and traffic disruption that it will cause that is the crux of Emma Green's opposition. It's not opposition to housing per se, nor is it blatant NIMBYism, as some have tried to claim. Not only would your approval tonight see the permanent loss of a beautiful green lung that's been at the heart of the Emma Green community for generations, but as you've heard, the proposals spectacularly breach the council's own local plan. Twice the number of houses, more than 3 times the area that policy CA1B clearly stipulates. What precedent does this set for Reading and indeed other LPAs more widely? What in fact is the point of a local plan if it can be so easily ignored? We know the council can override it. It did so when I sat here, right in this chair recently, to ask that a clear-cut case of tandem development be refused. It was approved despite neighbour opposition. I urge the committee this evening not to disregard its own local plan, yet again, and on such a large scale. Nor too is this iteration of the proposal substantively different to the previous plan that was roundly rejected by you last year. What has really changed to make it acceptable now? A reduction in size of just 34 homes and a lot of extra money being thrown at it? Yes, more housing is needed in Reading, especially genuinely affordable homes. But this plan only delivers a fraction of the affordable homes that are needed and would instead create a large number of vastly expensive open market properties well beyond the financial reach of those families whose need is greatest. What of the environmental aspects? This evening we have the imminent prospect of a council that has declared a climate emergency and prides itself on working swiftly towards a net zero future, agreeing to the loss of more than 100 trees, approving relatively insignificant biodiversity gains, and setting a cross-border precedent that could see the remaining RGC land in South Oxfordshire face similar proposals for even more housing. What of the inevitable transport and infrastructure problems for roads that are already heavily congested? Will 450 new cars really be unnoticeable on Peppard Road at peak times? I think not. Then there are concerns over foul water and sewerage on the site, the potential effects of more housing at Caversham Park in future too, should that be approved. The list goes on. As ward councillor, I would never set my face against extra investment for my ward. Which councillor here would? But at what cost? It's all very well adding generous 106 obligations to this recommendation, but the longer term damage to the community is simply not worth it. Where too was the consultation actually with Peppard Ward's own councillors, myself included, over these allocations? I wasn't aware of any. The council robustly fought off the Gladman development planned just yards from this site, and yet they now may approve this. Why such a U-turn? The Pinsons Hill proposal recently for some 60 fewer houses in Tilehurst was refused by councillors who went against an approval recommendation there. I urge you, colleagues, to do the same with this plan and this recommendation tonight. I was elected, like many of us, on a pledge to protect my ward's green and open spaces, to oppose unsustainable development, and to prioritise our town's brownfield sites where possible, of which we have plenty. This plan is the very definition of that, of what I campaigned against so hard, so I cannot now, in all good conscience, support it in any way, even with the financial benefits on offer. So for all these reasons, that is why this week I wrote to Michael Gove as the ward councillor, he being the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and I asked him to call in this application for his determination should you shortly vote to approve. I'm pleased to see the recommendation before you has now been amended as a result of my request. In your update report, I'm the third party who's mentioned in paragraph 11.1 who made the request to the Secretary of State. It means that should you vote to approve, the government is now watching this decision. It is asking the council not to issue a decision notice, a formal decision notice, until Mr. Gove has had sufficient time to consider my request for it to be called in. So I would urge the committee this evening to listen to the voice of my ward residents, the people here, the people who've registered their objections. It could hardly be clearer. And to vote once again to refuse this unacceptable plan as you did last July. And should any members cross-party still find themselves wavering, I urge you, if you can't reject outright, then at least defer, so the developers can go away and think again, and if they must, return with proposals that not only respect the local plan, but more importantly, respect the voice of the community that they are seeking to build within. They should bring residents with them, not alienate them. The people of Emma Green, Reading more widely, will thank you for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have Councillor Adele Barnett-Ward, who represents neighbouring Caversham.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, I represent Caversham Ward, so I'm not going to be commenting on anything in the report which is outside of Caversham Ward, so I'm not commenting on the development itself. Instead, I'm talking about the transport implications for Caversham Ward. This development will see a higher volume of car journeys down Peppard Road into Caversham Ward across the two bridges, unless we have significant mitigations to create reasonable, we've got trying to avoid saying significant twice, but I'm going to say it twice, a significant modal shift out of cars for people travelling from this new development down into Caversham Ward. I'm particularly concerned about the Peppard Road, Henley Road junction, which we call the Last Crumb Junction, Caversham, because you always name it after the pub, which at the moment has got no pedestrian facility. I welcome the doubling of the allocation to that junction, which will help, but it still won't provide a pedestrian facility, and it still won't give people the confidence to leave the car behind and maybe take a bicycle down the road. And it's a very long meeting. I could talk for longer, but I won't, because I know you want to get on to the deliberations, and I know people don't want to be here all night. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, that really does bring us to the end of the speakers who aren't part of the committee. So shall I please hand it over to you all? And I was wondering if Ward Councillor Stanford Beale wanted to speak first, or Councillor Robinson, because you, I don't know what you've decided to do about your
Councillor
position.
Robinson's going to speak, and then he's predetermined, so he won't be voting.
Okay. So do you want him to go first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, may I begin by thanking all the speakers, and that includes those in favour as well as those who spoke against, such as Kegg, Cadra and Egra, as well as our Ward Councillor Clarence Mitchell and Adele Barnett-Ward as Ward Councillors. I'd like to also thank the officers for their presentation and for all the hard work and effort in bringing this application to this committee meeting this evening. I am proud to live in a great part of Reading. It's currently called Peppard Ward, but will soon be called Emma Green. And why is it great? Because of the residents that live there, residents that genuinely care about their community and look after their neighbourhood and the environment that we live in. Not only am I a proud resident, but I'm also honoured to be one of the 3 councillors and proud to represent the views and opinions of our residents. Madam Chair, I cannot think of a planning application, or should I say applications, that have caused so much anger, stress and upset in our community than what Fairfax and the Golf Club have put our community through. Let's be under no illusion here that the Golf Club want to leave a great legacy to our community. This application is simply about greed. How much they get as a windfall and how much Fairfax will make on the deal. It is about feathering nests. We all know the promises made to members that selling the course could increase their bank balances substantially, which probably led to so many voting in the way they did. Claims that the Golf Club and Fairfax are helping Reading provide needed homes are not entirely true, in that on the 12th of October last year, the Reading Chronicle published an article stating that 137 brownfield sites existed in Reading, with the ability to provide for 13,000 new homes, according to council data. So there is no shortage of available land in Reading for housing. The land on which the Golf Club course was built was intended as land for recreation purposes, and those that started the club back in 1910 would be turning in their graves knowing what the current directors of the Golf Club have done. We know that there are brownfield sites that are much more suitable for such developments, but why use them when we have wonderful open space and lovely countryside that can be destroyed and beautiful trees that can be felled when the profits are so much higher? We know only too well that living in Evergreen comes with a price tag, as property prices are generally higher than other parts of the borough. This is nothing more than a get-rich-quick scheme, but at what cost to the community that hosted the golf club for over 110 years? It is astounding to think that the original application for 260 houses was withdrawn owing to the amount of objections, which then led to the second application asking for 257 houses, which again was rejected with an overwhelming opposition. Rejected unanimously in this chamber, and with the third application now suggesting 223 houses, which is what is before us this evening. Again, the good people of our ward have made their feelings well known, with over 4,000 objections raised yet again about the wholly negative impact that such a development would bring to our lives. The additional cars on our roads, which during rush hour are already at full capacity, not to mention the additional pollution and the pressure on schools and doctors' surgeries. But it isn't just the negative impact on us, but also the outlying villages around Evergreen, those in South Oxfordshire. We also need to consider the further impact of the proposed development at the BBC Monitoring Centre, which, if accepted, would add further strain on our infrastructure. I'm truly shocked and appalled to see that the officers have chosen to recommend the acceptance of this application, even though it is still a long way off what one could consider a sustainable development within our community. We have a local plan which is supposed to act as our Bible when it comes to local planning. The local plan under CO1B stated clearly that acceptable development on this site was in the region of 90 to 130 properties. So why is it being recommended when we are clearly in breach of the local plan and our own planning guidance? This new application has not changed so much from the last one presented, only that the number of houses has been reduced by 34, yet it is significantly over what was recommended. We also have so many matters outstanding, such as the basic question of water. Thames Water have already stated that a maximum of 100 properties for managing foul water, let alone the provision of clean water. Substantial work would be needed to address further development and the provision of the infrastructure to enable this. And who pays for this? We also have a rather lengthy section 106 with numerous additions such as 550,000 towards local healthcare. This we are pleased with. Yes, I'm sure Emma Green's surgery could certainly benefit and use this to help in expansion. But as I indicated in my last speech, it is doctors we need. Having had to close 2 surgeries in Caversham due to recruitment problems already. 557,000 towards open space, and this includes 250,000 for a 3G sports pitch. Looking at the cost of 3G sports pitches, I think 250,000 is half what they normally cost. But it begs the question, why were no local councillors involved in these talks as to how to best use such funds in Emma Green? Thousands to Reading buses, yet without any thought as to whether new residents would indeed use them. The simple fact is, whilst these are beneficial, and we certainly welcome investment north of the river, they do not address the concerns of the community at all. No compensation could, as this application, if it is accepted, would cause irreparable damage to our environment as well as to our community and its infrastructure. I always thought it was the role of the council to act in the best interests of the community it serves. However, this decision to recommend approval leads me to question that assumption. We know that Fairfax waited until the last opportunity to launch an appeal against the decision for their last application. So maybe one might think that an approach to appease by allowing 223 houses would help. However, what would stop Fairfax and the golf club going ahead and building the 257 should the appeal, God forbid, be successful? The decision by the officers to recommend acceptance of this proposal is nothing short of a betrayal, in my opinion. 4,000 plus objections and clearly an application in contradiction of the local plan and so many other planning guidelines, and objections by many leading groups such as Cadra, Egra, Keg, Friends of the Earth, and it continues. It is as if the planning team are not listening to the community, but to those that would clearly profit from the proposed development. I'd like to thank many of the residents who have objected to this application, including Mr. John Sharp, who all of us received an email from over the last few days, who raised very serious concerns over our council's approach to compliance on the subject of the proposal to adopt air source heat pumps instead of ground source heat pumps. This alone requires a full explanation. I know that we have had an explanation of sorts in the update pack, but given the length of the report that Mr. Sharp sent in, I think there are certainly lots more questions that need answering. The simple facts are that we and South Oxon fought against the Gladman proposals to build just 244 houses on the outskirts of the ward, based on the loss of valuable countryside, the negative impacts this would have on our infrastructure and community. This was rightly refused, and also refused on appeal, and so should this application be this evening. By accepting it, we are guilty of gross hypocrisy in that we said no to Gladman's based on the devastating effect that would have, and yes to this in the heart of Emma Green. This makes no sense. This would be setting a terrible and dangerous precedent, with the possibility of leading to South Oxfordshire granting permission for additional development across the border should it be requested. And it will be subjecting our community to years of disrupting development on the doorstep of our local school. Incidentally, not 850 metres away from the site, as is incorrectly stated.
Robinson, I've been fairly indulgent. We normally allow about 5 minutes each, but...
Can I quickly wrap up then, please? All right. My fellow councillors on this panel, please, I beg you, do the right thing and vote against this proposal and the misguided recommendation. Our community has suffered enough with the spectre of the threat of this proposal hanging over our heads for a few years. So please let us send a clear message that we will not be bullied by developers into accepting unsustainable development in our town. For a council that claims to lead on climate change, We need to protect open spaces, not destroy them. We need to protect trees, not fell them. We need to protect our wildlife habitats, not drive them out. Please listen to the residents. In this case, they have spoken loud and clear, no to this proposal. Thank you.
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, Councillor Robinson's stirring words and criticism of the scheme are entirely his own matter, but I think his criticism of officers was unwarranted, and he might just wish, on reflection, to take that back.
I was about to make the same point, Councillor Williams, and there's been a number of personal attacks on the officers during the evening, and I regret that greatly. We should be respecting that they have a personal and professional view about this, and we don't have to agree with it, or we might agree with it, and it's not right to be naming them publicly. So please, could people desist from doing that?
Yep, Madam Chairman, I did not name anybody personally in that. No. I just said that the decision was wrong.
Councillor Stanford-Beale, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. We've already heard from two of my ward colleagues now, the objectors, the supporters and the applicant tonight, so I will keep this brief. This is a one-page speech. This is the third application, the second time that this site's come before us in the chamber. I've attended both site visits for the applicant, and I would like to thank the applicant for providing services to their tree surveyor, so if I could ask detailed questions about the trees on the site on the day, and also we had detailed tree maps. The site has generated almost 10,000 comments on the planning portal. As ward councillor, I've had many emails and phone calls and visits about this application. The vast majority are against the building of 223 homes on this site, but there are some who feel that we need good quality, affordable housing in the area, and this site would enable them to have a home locally. I have read the objections and had to balance the local plan, the officer's report and all the objections and supported communications. This application is improved over the previous version as it's got fewer houses. There is a green barrier between the rear of the houses on Brooklyn Drive with the swale, and there's more public open space in the centre of the site around the veteran oak tree. Trees will have to be felled, but there is a good plan to replant mature trees as opposed to whips as you had in the previous plan. But I've considered all the information, and I feel that again we need to refuse this planning application on the grounds that it's unacceptable loss of open space, EN8, it's loss of biodiversity and the green network. I was not convinced by the developer's explanation to Councillor Rowland about a green link, that's EN12, and then loss of trees, hedges, woodlands, EN14. We've also got the loss of the tree canopy, which is against our tree strategy. We're supposed to be improving our tree canopy over the borough, not reducing it. Fourthly, we're going to have an increase of cars and traffic and congestion, and that will be detrimental to the transport network, which is against TR3, in particular the number of cars hitting the Peppard Road, Henley Road, Prospect Street Junction, which Councillor Barnett-Ward has spoken to us about, and of course bridges over the Thames. The reason why we've got no large sites planned for development north of the river is because the bridges are at capacity, and I know that as a director of Reading Buses. I've had many a meeting looking at the timings and the punctuality and reliability of the bus services, which we can't do because of congestion on the bridges. The reduction of the canopy cover and the increased car movements will also be detrimental to the air quality, which is already an issue in Caversham. We've got the fixed air quality monitors that show us that. And finally, of course, we did in this chamber declare a climate emergency, that we were going to do everything we could to become carbon neutral and reduce our impact. This application goes completely against that. So for all those reasons, I recommend this application refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's indicating next? I thought it was Councillor Challenger.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you obviously to all of the speakers and councillors and members of the public, as well as the staff, for putting together this. It's always an interesting debate when you have Tories arguing against a free market, but here we are. I think I want to draw attention to the local plan, where we're not talking about the specific site in the local plan. It's a 3.75 hectare site in the local plan. This is a 12 hectare site. Therefore, the proposal is very different than anything envisioned in the local plan that was dreamt up and delivered 3 years ago. You know, it was also about preserving leisure facilities. This plan, you know, changes that because the golf course has changed. It's changed its operation, it's changed its plans as well. Therefore, the local plan adapts and changes. We're seeing 600,000 delivered for local sports in the wider community that has not been there currently. We're seeing 4 million being invested back into the community for a range of schemes. And I think also we have to talk about the fact that we're having gains of biodiversity. That means the biodiversity that's already there, different that it may be, will be gaining. You know, that is a positive to see, and we don't see that in development all the time. And I think, you know, we're having 50 clauses that have to be met before a single sort of spade can be put in the ground. That is a stringent level, and, you know, as the planning authority, we'll be working hard to make sure that every one of those is met. You know, that is a huge amount of undertaking to, you know, see. So, you know, I'm glad to see a thorough and, you know, detailed application.
Thank you. I have next Councillor Josh Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll have my go. Right, we can't all talk about every aspect of this, despite the fact that it is a large application. Or we'd all be producing our own reports that are 120 pages long. But I would like to pick out a few points. First, I want to thank the planning officer, who I won't name, for his clear, calm and easily understood report, I thought. There have been criticisms of its conclusions, including from my left, and they are entirely fair and legitimate, Chair. We should always come to our own conclusions. We don't have to accept them. But I hope no criticisms of someone who is an excellent planning officer, and it's an excellent detailed report. It doesn't mean I agree with it all. It just means it's an excellent report, Chair. So I want to say a few words about principles. The first is that we shouldn't overrule an element of the local plan on the area to be developed, on the number of properties. The idea that CA1B is no longer valid simply because the landowner says it's not valid is not one I can support. The local plan was drawn up or dreamt up, as Councillor Chandler said, with the purpose of setting out the borough's planning policies, not developers' planning policies. Everyone knows that would be quite a different document. If the developer doesn't wish to conform to the local plan, then they can sell the land to someone who does. This development is double the allocation, although I do want to note, and I trust that a couple of other councillors will be talking about the affordable housing allocation, because it is a significant element of this plan. Anyway, CA1B is not the only policy at play here, I realise that, but it's not one that I'm willing to dismiss. There's also the principle that we should be building developments like this without direct public transport links within the entire site is also not one I share. The impact on traffic will be considerable. Handing Section 106 money over to the council is not a guarantee that it will be spent. Money taken in contributions remains unspent many years later over in my part of East Reading. I'm unconvinced, having read all the information, that the resulting air pollution in Caversham will be mitigated by some signalling improvements. Policy EN8 deals with the loss of open space, approximately 7 hectares lost of the existing 11.5 in the application area. It's clear from our local plan that any loss must be replaced or improved to a level that mitigates that loss. Again, it's not a principle that I will accept, that a developer can build all over open space and then say, well, I'll let you have access to the rest of it, the bit that's left over. That neither replaces nor improves and isn't acceptable. That we should mitigate the loss of hectares of green open space with a plastic sports pitch is unacceptable. On the Housing, Neighbourhood and Leisure Committee, Green councillors have voted against the proliferation of plastic pitches in the borough, specifically because of their environmental impact. It would be a very poor substitute for 7 hectares of open space. Lots of people have said climate emergency this evening, Chair, but we must take that seriously. This development shows very limited sustainability, which results in instead a 135 grand contribution to RBC. The biodiversity gain is extremely unclear. There's a potential on-site gain of 1.7%, which is so far within the margin for error that we may gain nothing at all. Noting that there's an unspecified contribution that the developer must make for additional off-site 10% improvement. But either way, I don't find it acceptable on a site like this that we could result in a loss to the environment. The proposed green link has been discussed, and it was noted by the Wildlife Trust that this is poor. I'm not an expert in this. I accept that others are, and I personally remained unconvinced by the plans and the design for this green link. So I support the refusal on that basis as well. Is the development even needed? The report says not. The report notes that there is not at this time a shortfall in housing provision. So I think we should go back to CA1B. But we do desperately need affordable housing in the borough. There's no doubt that this scheme is either very nearly or is policy compliant in both provision and mix. And no one here should reject such an offer out of hand. And that does carry weight. Affordable provision of 30% is very welcome. But because the scheme, in my opinion, fails on many other counts, despite some changes, it continues to fail. Well, that's probably enough from me, sorry. The loss of open space, the transport issues, the environmental issues, the failure to accord with the local plan are all, in my opinion, outweighing the benefit of affordable homes. And I support the recommendation from my left for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ennis, you're next.
Thank you. I'm just going to remind some of our councillors present who criticised this administration only last week, if my short-term memory will be right, about the lack of affordable housing, and then they're turning around and saying there's no need for housing developments. I think we need to link ourselves up here and be a little bit consistent when we're talking about inequalities and affordable housing. 1 minute we need them, next minute we don't. I think just reminding we need to be thinking about that very seriously. I think it's a very difficult position. I opposed the last planning. I met with KEG and I met with the developers, and I've done my due diligence because I do not want to be making decisions lightly on an area and this application with such temerity. The point I made at the last application was that it will come back. As I would call myself a veteran of opposition to housing developments, they always come back. And they have every right to, by the way, because we live in a society where people on private land, as an ex-Trotskyite, live on private land, have a right to sell it for a profit. Not my sort of society 30 years ago, but that's what society is, and it's something that we tend to cherish nowadays, is that if you've got private land, you can build on it, you can think, and you can sell it for a profit. And that is what they're doing. It's not a crime. What they're doing is they're trying to make as much money as possible. It's interesting to hear some of the councillors from the blue side of life who are talking about that being a crime. It's not. Trying to get money for it, and they're trying to meet the demands that the council on its plan and national planning policy are meeting. And I think I always said that they're going to come back and they're going to come back and answer the various issues. Now, I think totally correct and totally right for the objections to be raised about those conditions. 50 of them, they're rigorous in its scrutiny. And if any of them fail, that don't get built. The fact is that the officers are only doing their job to interpret what national grant local recommendations or national recommendations for planning law. It meets them. It meets them. That's their job. Their job is not to make decisions, is to recommend it. Because after all, it is a disused golf club, which will be left to fester if it's not built on. It won't be green prime land that can be used and accessed by members of the public. As much as I want that to happen, I want that to happen. I want, but I know you thumbs up on fair play to you because I think it was a brilliant speech, by the way, about the climate change. But we're being realistic that ain't going to happen. It's not going to be left. If they go away, they're not going to leave it there and leave it as green land. It wasn't realistic, to be honest with you, not to expect nothing to be built on that golf course. It was always going to come back. And I would love to keep it forever, but it's private land and it's not possible. And the fact is the developers have increased. It might not be satisfactory to the local community. We can see that by a stretch. increased open space close to the houses. That's a fact, and that's a difficult one to overcome. But every political party, and there's politicians of all shapes and sizes in this room, have acknowledged that there is a housing crisis nationally and locally, and that more houses are needed. I think it was over, some report was done, by the way, 700 in the Caversham area was talked about to meet the need of families living north of the river. That's what all political parties, and in fact, current planning law proposals by the government, by Mr. Gove, so we must remember that when we call it in, are actually proposing to weaken planning restrictions to stop local bothering councillors from building. So I'll be interested, I look with great interest to see what the call-in does come up. I tell you, under proposed unproposed national government law, councils won't be able to put 50 conditions on any development. I've opposed a lot of developments in my time, as I said. One particular one, 230 houses. We took it 7 years. We took it to a judicial review. We won. We finally lost in the end. We thought it was the end of the world, and rightly so, and felt grim when that was built. But I went back there and I saw the green space and I saw the well laid out houses. It's in Southcote. Seeing the young people there, young families in them houses, benefiting from cheaper homes that I myself take for granted. So when we do talk about thousands opposing, and they do, and rightly so, let's respect that. Thousands upon thousands of people have opposed this. There will be interest, and we can't deny this. There will be a lot of interest from young families, particularly in Caversham. We'll be looking at the prices, we'll be looking at affordability, we'll be looking at this development and thinking in a highly desirable area. I'm a southerner, I'm a Whitley man, and I'm from South Reading. Caversham is a highly desirable area, and that they will want their families and children to have homes there. Local people will be interested in them houses. That is a fact. The best quality houses, they will be built better than most of the houses in Reading, and a look at zero carbon footprint well set out. So that will happen. And when we talk about a climate emergency, we do talk about a climate emergency, and I'm as much in favour. I'm a walker, and I don't like using my car. But are we really saying that we're never going to build another house again? Are we really saying that? We're never going to build another development again in any part of Reading? Are we really saying that? And we're not taking into consideration the inequality, the massive inequality that we're facing nationally and locally for young people, many of whom, I was a bog standard factory worker when I got my first mortgage at the age of 20. And there's people gone to university who are earning 40 to 50,000 who can never afford a cheap home. I'm worried about that in some ways as much as getting the climate sorted out. That worries me. And I want to send a message to developers that I want the sort of conditions that are laid out here 50 plus, to make sure that every condition is met, and that 30% proper affordability, which it is, proper affordability in homes in Reading. So I totally understand the objections. I was there last time and thought very seriously about this, but the realism that I face as a councillor who's on the planning applications is that a development will be built on that site. It will be built on that golf course. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to vote for granting, because I think it's the best opportunity for it, because if we don't, it will be a worse development or something else that I don't think will be acceptable. So therefore, subject to the 50 conditions, including the call-in, I will be supporting grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Carnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the people that have spoken tonight, both for and against the proposal. I think in the few years I've sat on this committee, this is the first time a ward council has come to address the committee on an issue outside of their own ward. I also notice Thames Ward's other Conservative councillor sitting in the public gallery. I think that says a lot of the strength of opposition to this proposal from the people north of the river. But this is an interesting proposal. A development including 2 to 5 bedroom houses, affordable or otherwise, will allow families to grow and put down roots in Reading in a way that living in flats doesn't allow. But the development does throw up potential problems. With parking for 442 vehicles, there is the potential for 900 or more vehicle movements a day when you include deliveries, tradesmen and the like. That compares with 600 vehicle movements a day on the busiest days when it functioned as a golf course. Each movement will be along Kidmore End Road, a small local road, often with parking along one side. There's the potential recipe there for chaos. After the site visit, I spent about 15 minutes queuing in the traffic towards the Last Crumb junction. I was almost back at Grosvenor Road when I first stopped. That's 15 minutes of cars sitting there, potentially putting out fumes, not achieving anything, just pollution. And that wasn't at peak time. That's just going to add to problems. The developer can only make this worse. And of course, the traffic issues will continue further into Lower Caversham and across the 2 bridges. I'm concerned that this is such a large variation from the local plan, between 172 and 245% above what is suggested in the local plan. If we don't abide by the local plan, does it have any purpose? Then we can look to Thames Water. They can only service the foul water from 100 homes. I suspect the only thing worse for the people of Emma Green than a flood would be a flood of sewage. But earlier this evening, we approved the Huntley and Palmer Social Club for local listing. It's a fine example of architecture of its time using local materials. Will the councillors who follow in our footsteps be discussing local listing for any part of this development? I really don't think so. Councillor Ennis talks about the need for affordable housing, and yes, we all agree there is a need for affordable housing and no one is opposed to it, but it needs to be part of a sustainable development, not just used to paper over the flaws and failings of this scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now go on to Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt Burns, for your report and presentation, and thanks to all the speakers and the public that attended tonight. I'm Councillor Mickey Lang, as the card says. As well as sitting on the Planning Committee, I'm Vice Chair of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Leisure Committee and a member of the Traffic Subgroup. I've tried to be as holistic with my approach to this application. I was one of the councillors that visited the site. It was important for me to see the physical layout of the new proposal. As with all planning decisions, it's about balance. No development will meet all the council's planning framework. Feelings run high, as they are with this application. I'm a Whitley Ward councillor. I moved to Whitley in mid-90s, yeah. But I grew up in Caversham. I went to the Hill Primary School and then Highdown. We first lived in Chiltern Road, as did my nan and grandpa. My other nan, we called Two Nana, she lived in Hadrian's Walk in Whitley. My dad was a lorry driver, my mum a hairdresser, but they could afford to buy a home in Caversham. My grandpa passed away. We moved with my nan to Caversham Park, to one of those 3-storey houses in Galsworthy Drive. Affordable housing was more available then. Take the area close to Highdown School, my old school, Scott Close, Elliot Close, Chaucer Close, Grove Road, Knights Way, Buckingham Drive, even Rotherfield Way. All roads with significant amounts of local authority housing, council housing. On Caversham Park, there was some council housing too. I asked myself, would a development such as Caversham Park Village get through planning today? I think it unlikely. So when we have a development such as this one, I will look at it sympathetically. It can provide 223 family homes, including 67 affordable units, 8 one-bedroom flats, 6 two-bedroom flats, 12 two-bedroom homes, 9 three-bedroom homes, 6 four-bedroom homes, all at Reading affordable rent levels. Add to this a further 26 units for affordable home ownership. This application not only meets our affordable housing aspiration, it goes beyond it. Also, there are 14 important Section 106 and circa 50 conditions attached to this application, which I'm sure my colleagues will talk about in more detail. However, I do note a comment from the Emma Green Residents Association that the infrastructure promises for the previous development of Bugs Bottom, which Stainthorpe was talking about, never materialised. This is a very relevant point. And if the public are to keep faith in the planning process, obligations by developers and councils must be met. So to wrap it up, it's not a long one, right? If and when these homes are completed, families will enjoy living in them. Emma Green will still be green and a wonderful place to live. Children will mix, children will make new friends, communities will thrive, and people will still have a pint in the pub. So tonight, I am minded to approve this application.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Page next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And can I thank all those that have taken the trouble to come along this evening and address us, and also the 222 people that appear to be listening online. Can I also associate myself, Chair, with the condemnation of the remarks that a number of colleagues have made, and former council colleagues, attacking the council officers in terms that is completely unacceptable. And I would like to place on record my appreciation for the work that Matt Burns and other colleagues in the planning department have done about this, about this application. In bringing forward recommendations, they are not in any way betraying the local plan, nor this authority. They are doing their job, and it is up to us as members of the planning committee, obviously, to take a decision on the application. Can I firstly address this issue of policy CA1B? I find it regrettable that Councillor Robinson, I believe deliberately, is distorting the position, Councillor Mitchell as well, and a number of other colleagues. CA1B applies to about a third of this application site, and it is so shown clearly on page 134 of our papers. And I would draw your attention to the fact that the policy itself, quite rarely in terms of our policy, is linked specifically to an activity on that site. And the phrase "subject to the future provision of golf on the remainder of the golf club site" is a material fact. It's a material fact that has changed. And 4 years ago, when the public inquiry was heard at the Old Town Hall, there was quite a bit of discussion about this site. And indeed, the representatives of the golf club were there. They gave evidence, and others as well. And the inspector amended our draft plan, and the final version is the one that's reproduced on page 134. And so the number of houses posited between 90 to 130 dwellings, given as a guideline figure, relates to a small part of this site. And because the golf club is no longer on the rest of the site, officers have quite rightly said, and this would be clearly decided if this were to go to appeal, an inspector would also conclude rightly that the circumstances had materially changed and that this policy was no longer applicable in the terms that it's drafted, which therefore means that the site as a whole, which the applicant has a right to bring forward in totality, has to be looked at against a raft of other policies. Now, for Councillor Robinson to attack the integrity of Reading Golf Club with some frankly quite slanderous comments this evening, he's entitled to those views, but to talk about them feathering their nest is no more than what any developer does with any site. It is called capitalism, Councillor Robinson, something your party promotes and something which this government is promoting. Indeed, if you're Mr. Desmond, you get to sit next to a Secretary of State because you're paid for it, and you get a planning consent as a result. Fortunately, the courts came to the rescue, or your Russian, no, let's not go there for the moment. But the fact is, Councillor Robinson, that your get-rich-quick attack on these developers is no more than the development system that we have in this country. And for a Conservative councillor to attack it is just barefaced hypocrisy. So let's not have any of this nonsense about the local plan somehow being breached or betrayed or whatever. That element is no longer in play. So let's just get that on the record. Now, in terms, Chair, of the benefits in terms of public open space, I think colleagues have addressed that. There was no right of general public access to this site. The site is now proposed with a level of public access that I think is commendable and acceptable. The issue of housing, colleagues have also addressed in impassioned terms. The broader point I would make, though, about affordable housing is that affordable housing of the sort that's being offered on this site is unobtainable in the town centre or on brownfield sites. And that is a fact, simply because of the cost of the land. Otherwise, you would have seen it on the former Wick site or on the former Homebase site. And indeed, other sites that are coming forward in the Carnarvon Drive area may offer a handful token houses, but in terms of delivering the quantity of affordable housing that Councillor Leng rightly referred to, it is only sites of this sort that will deliver that. And that is where the need is. You know, our numbers that we are delivering in terms of flats disguise the fact that within that there is completely inadequate provision of affordable housing of the sort that is on this site. So let's not have any of this nonsense that there's plenty of alternative sites available for this. Councillor Mitchell might like to say that more affordable housing is needed elsewhere in Reading, but it won't be of the right sort, and it won't be on the brownfield sites that I've referred to. Just turning briefly to the transport side, the reason I asked the question, excuse me, Chair. The reason I asked the question of Mr. Walton about the previous level of activity on the site associated with the golf course was to make the point that the level of activity on the site at present is obviously very dormant, and unfortunately sites of this sort that have had quite a bit of traffic generation in the past then lapse, then become almost dormant, and people measure the current position against what is proposed, against what they should be measuring is what it could have been if it had maxed out as a golf course. And I think the answer that Mr. Walton gave in terms of the density now proposed is such that it's probably of a slightly lower density than on the original CA1B proposal. And it brings a measure of benefits that have been identified by colleagues. Transport is always a hard one. We have problems at the Crum Junction, and we have had for decades. It would be wrong to load all the problems there onto this development and expect the developer to have to sort it. I welcome the increased payment towards improving the traffic lights there, and the mover system, when it works properly, works well, rather than the fixed phases that we have at the moment that can be very frustrating and don't respond to demand. The other point that I would make about transport in the post-pandemic world is that we are in a different world where the huge peak hour spikes no longer take place. We have congestion, yes, but it is not of the same concentrated nature we've had, and we will see continual trends towards a more balanced mix between home working and office working. That's not in any way to decry the concerns north of the river about traffic congestion, and indeed our borough plan and our transport strategy does have proposals to address that, but of course they have been thwarted historically by Oxfordshire County Council and South Oxfordshire. The final point, Chair, that I would make relates to the contributions that are being made and listed on page 184 via section 106 and the community infrastructure levy, and colleagues have drawn attention to these. I would make a specific point addressed as much through you, Chair, to Councillor Barnett Ward and to councillors north of the river, that 15% of whatever is paid in SIL payments, and 15% will be a minimum of 369,000, and with an upper range of £500,000, that 15% is for local deployment on schemes either to address or promote more sustainable transport or other environmental benefits. And that money will become available once the SIL payments have been received, and it will be for local councillors in that area to input their preferences, as we have seen with the consultation that's just completed and upon which a report is coming to Policy Committee next Monday. So, Chair, turning to the conclusions on page 186 of our papers, I would agree that the provision of public access is a significant benefit of the proposed development. I agree that the housing gain is of a sort that is of significant benefit and will help address the sorts of people that Councillor Lang referred to, and Councillor Ennis, not only young but those who live in the area. It will provide, I realise that some will argue that there's only a marginal gain in biodiversity, but I can tell you, colleagues, as somebody who did a lot of caddying, I never played golf, but I caddied and earned quite a bit from it as a teenager, that there is nothing more that lacks biodiversity than a well-manicured golf course. And certainly the biodiversity that will be brought to this area will be an enhancement to that which any golf course properly looked after will be able to offer. So, Chair, I welcome the proposed conditions that are listed in great detail in the report. I welcome the fact that the consultations with our statutory undertakers, such as Thames Water, have produced some fairly rigorous conditions, and rightly so, to safeguard the interests not only of the wider environment but also of the site itself. And Chair, I'm happy to propose that we agree the recommended approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. I think you're probably the other person I've seen indicating.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'd also like to note my thanks to officers this evening. As the committee knows, developments often provide challenges, and I really do acknowledge the concerns that local residents have regarding this application, with substantial objections lodged. I've read through all the incoming correspondence from local residents and community groups, and indeed we've heard from those residents this evening, and like other members, I thank them. Councillors have eloquently dealt with many aspects of this application this evening, including the accusations of breaches to the local plan, and I associate myself with those comments. We could all write a long report, as Councillor Williams mentioned earlier, and I intend just to supplement colleagues' comments and make some new ones so that we're not here all night. Looking first to the objection that there is a loss of open space, which I queried with the objectors this evening. In visiting the site, it was really apparent to me that the footprint of the site is extensive. And whilst residents have had the enjoyment of the land, it is private land, and it is apparent to me that the applicant intends to mitigate any loss of open space by enhancing the landscape. And as a committee, we have to balance the loss of open space versus the enhancements proposed. Opening up the site unlocks opportunity for many to access green space, which is not feasible at the current time, but I do appreciate that it is difficult for local residents and their concerns related to this. Moving on, I acknowledge that construction is a concern for some, and we received a number of objections on this point. Construction is not a sufficient planning reason to refuse, and the committee will note the standard condition to provide a construction method statement. I know too well from experience in my own ward the difficulties that development brings, and I am glad that officers have acknowledged this in their report. And if the committee is minded to grant this evening, I hope that the recommendations contained in the report about helpline and contact details are carried out. Affordable housing has been spoken to this evening, and as Councillor Leng said, we must always take that holistic approach and balance the merits and challenges associated with any proposal. As the lead councillor for housing, I often speak with residents who are attempting to seek housing via the council's register, and often these residents are in overcrowded accommodation, and we know there is a struggle when it comes to affordable large family homes in Reading. Some objectors have commented that Reading has an adequate housing supply in line with government targets, or that there are brownfield site alternatives, and Councillor Page has refuted these, and I agree with the comments he made. We know that some families make the choice to move outside of Reading due to the lack of family homes, and indeed a lot of my friends have moved outside of Reading to get onto the housing ladder. Some have also commented that this proposal offers insignificant affordable homes, and I do not agree with this. We know that this application provides the opportunity to build a significant number of family homes at Reading affordable rent with provision for shared ownership too. Since January 2020, the council has advertised only 6 4-bedroom council houses, with many on the waiting list. As a council, we must be committed to putting the provision of affordable housing at the top of our agenda, and we know that affordable housing matters to residents because they told us in a recent survey. It is clear that the applicant acknowledges our commitment to increasing affordable housing, and this development alone proposes the same number of 4-bedroom homes advertised by the council in the space of over 2 years. So to say that the affordable housing element is not significant is just untrue. We need family homes, and the approval of this proposed development will assist us in addressing housing needs within Reading. I also know that sustainable development in our town is imperative if we are going to meet our net zero climate ambitions in line with the local plan policies CC3 and CC4. This proposal acknowledges our commitment to the environment, and I'm pleased with the commitment from the applicant to meet in investing into low carbon technologies. Not only is sustainable development important in view of the climate crisis, but it will too play a role in unlocking cheaper energy bills for residents, which is very pertinent with the current cost of living crisis. I note that the update pack refers to the use of air source heat pumps and the rationale on using these rather than ground source heat pumps, further to a residents' representation that there is an error in the compliance of the officer commentary in the main report. Councillor Robinson did not seem reassured by the update report on this point, yet he could have asked officers questions this evening and he did not. Personally, I feel reassured by the update pack in respect of this and the compliance with our local plan. And I'm also grateful to the applicant for providing a full comprehensive rebuttal further to the residents' apparent misguided analysis on low carbon heating systems. Chair, in concluding, I know that the committee always carefully assess the merits of all applications. Major applications like this offer great opportunities, but there are challenges to be considered too, and I'm not putting those down. I'm also mindful of the merits that are achieved through the various Section 106 commitments, and I believe that the plan conditions do go a long way in mitigating against the challenges presented. The last application that came to committee, we all kind of felt that there were more questions than answers and refused on that basis. Yet I feel the report this evening answers those previous questions we had with a more thought through proposal. And having considered both the merits and challenges associated with this application, I am minded to grant approval this evening.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Rowland, and then I think that's probably nearly everybody who wants to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be brief. There's just a few things I wanted to discuss. I, in particular, took an extreme bit of concern about the climate change impact and the situation involving biodiversity on this site. I appreciate things that my colleagues have certainly said this evening about affordable housing, about the pressures of transport and everything else, but I will simply focus on the biodiversity. I was very disappointed that when I began to read the papers and everything, I noticed that statutory responses were not received from, for example, Natural England, the Environment Agency. The Children's Conservation Board simply said, you know, that please take concern of the area as a material consideration. So it was very disappointing that for something that means so much, certainly to residents, and I certainly appreciate their input this evening, that was really disappointing. There were a number of really good reports, especially the Bebout report, I would note, and then also I appreciated the extra trouble that the officers went into with the third-party additional information that was gathered in regards to the environment and addressing biodiversity, because there were challenges. There's definitely were challenges on the site. I know that you understood that I asked the question earlier of the developer in regards to the north-south link and the east-west link. I would, in my heart of hearts, really wish something could be done about that. I do think it's an issue. I do understand on balance that people that are smarter than me in regards to that believe that it can be mitigated. I see that we've got conditions 13 and conditions 15, for example, dealing with the landscaping that could possibly allow for some kind of further mitigation. In my dreams, I hope that could yet happen. The unfortunate thing is yes, this is private land. We don't really get a choice. The bucolic, beautiful green space that we have there is owned by someone that wants to make profit. And that is simply the fact. I believe that if the wonderful ideas of an arboretum or of an open space had been able to get sufficient money or funding behind it, that perhaps that really could have truly happened. Unfortunately, developers are the ones with the money, and we are the ones as a council and indeed at the Planning Applications Committee here that get to decide some of these very difficult decisions when a developer comes forward with a situation like this. I do take good heart that we've got affordable housing, that we've got something here that is going to help families that really need those properties. The opportunity of open space that is much better addressed in this application. I went on the site visit twice. The opportunity for affordable housing, the opportunity for real affordable housing and not affordable housing in flats, which many people will sit down there and be upset with us over. If that's all we can get, is just really an incredible thing that we can't overlook. So in balance, I will be voting for the acceptance of this application. I will trust and have faith that my officers that I know have worked extremely hard with the biodiversity, with the tree counts, and all of those things that I know that they go to painstaking lengths over, and I thank them. will be worked forward as this development goes forward in the future. And I think that's it from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will ask officers if they want to comment on anything in a second, but if I could just add, I think this has been a very difficult application for all of us. We've given a lot of thought to it. I think the site visit was incredibly helpful in beginning to understand what was meant. There's an area I knew well when I was about 10 years old, and it's amazing how your adult eyes see it somewhat differently all those years later. But growing up very nearby and going to Emma Green Primary, it was somewhere we as kids were on frequently, even though we probably weren't meant to be. Anyway, you know, it has been difficult. I understand absolutely where the residents are coming from. I'm sure any of us, if this sort of development was proposed near us, would have huge reservations, if not objections. And they've certainly worked very hard to bring everything to our attention. And I know colleagues have been taking all those objections very, very seriously. However, for me, it's, you know, what will we get there if we don't approve this? What will we get there? As somebody else has said, this is a privately owned site. The owners are entitled to bring forward planning application after planning application if they wish, and then, you know, maybe take their chance with appeal or whatever. But nevertheless, I think this is a considerable improvement on the last application, which I had no hesitation in voting to turn down. But I think everything that's covered in this very good report, and thank you again to the officers who've worked on it, particularly Matt Byrne. We have got a lot of gain in here that will help mitigate some of the effects, and also we will be, I think, when it's finally finished, construction period is always difficult. When it's actually finished, this will be somewhere in the future that people believe is a good development with a lot of open space. No, I'm going. So while I understand why people, sorry, could you be quiet, please? I understand why people are going to be upset if the decision goes in favour of this development, but as I say, I've weighed up very carefully, as have my colleagues, the pros and cons, and I have come to the conclusion, on balance, I will be supporting this application. Do officers have anything they want to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just thought it's important just to reiterate just regarding the local plan and the application of policy CA1B. I think that the reasons as to why it is no longer practical to bring forward the development envisaged by that plan have been made clear and discussed, but that fact does not take away the fact that the application has still been considered fully in accordance with the plan and all the other relevant policies. And I'm satisfied that is covered in full within the reports and within the update report. I think I could also say regarding Councillor Rowland's specific question regarding concern about the green link in the southern part of the site where those free dwellings are located. I would suggest we could specifically reference those properties under policy 18, which is the habitat enhancement scheme, and that would ensure that kind of habitat enhancement measures can be focused to that part of the site, so we can ensure that that part of the green link is reinforced and maintained as part of the development. But apart from that, Chair, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks again for a very thorough report. Right, I'm going to move to the vote now. Can I see all those in favour of granting this proposal? And all those against? And are there any abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. everybody for their patience this evening. It's been a very long discussion, but it's an important site, and I know that in the run up to the meeting we've all been agonising over the whole decision, and we have come to what we believe is our own conclusion. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just Councillor Stanford Beale and Councillor Robinson, you did mention earlier that Councillor Robinson wouldn't be voting.
Oh. Abstained.
You abstained. Okay. Sorry, I thought you'd voted against.
Just wait while people leave, and then we've got one more application to consider this evening. You won't get away with that easily, Councillor Page. It's in my ward.
Thank you for chairing that, Chair.
Eh?
Thank you for chairing that.
Oh.
That's not the easiest one to do.
Well, I'm sorry, I forgot Adele and Clarence.
You should have just left. Move through.
Right, I think enough people have now left. Can we go back to land at the rear of 2930 Turn Close on page 47? Ethne. Sorry, could you? Sorry? I'm sorry, we've had that behaviour at the end. All right, right. Can we try and calm this down and carry on to page 47? Outrageous though it may be. Right, case officer to introduce.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, you've had such a long wait, Ethne.
I'll try keep it brief. This application seeks full planning permission for a detached bungalow following demolition of garages. The scheme is considered to be acceptable in terms of its design and impact on the wider area, the quality of accommodation and amenity space for future occupiers, the impact on neighbouring properties and provision of soft landscaping, biodiversity enhancements and parking. The recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions as set out in the main agenda report and completion of a legal agreement to secure a financial contribution towards affordable housing as also set out within the main agenda report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And can I just, so the reason I asked for this to come to committee was because for many, many years, this site at the back of Turn Close and Taff Way has formed a very unpleasant, unattractive piece of derelict land. But because of the amount of dereliction, no self-respecting burglar would ever try and go anywhere near it. So we've been waiting for an application that would be acceptable, and in the past we've had applications for blocks of flats which were overlooking and so on. So it is good to see this particular application, which I believe will do away with the concern about any overlooking and so on. However, I would like to just ask if ward councillors could be consulted in detail about the boundary treatment so that we can both be assured about how it looks, but also more importantly about the security of the back gardens, in particularly Taff Way. So if we could add that as a recommendation to include consultation with us as ward councillors, that would satisfy me, I think, and hopefully residents will be satisfied that that's being looked at. I'm sure you would look at it, but it's about the public awareness of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We can ensure that details of the boundary treatment scheme are circulated to ward councillors when received and before approval.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wanted to comment? No? Can I see all those in favour of granting this? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everybody for what's been a, well, trying evening. I think, I'm not sure what the right word is, but thank you. Oh no, what is it? Everything.